Small town Oklahoma, a product of the prosperity of the early 20th century. Self-sustaining economic engines planted along the railroad as it conquered the western frontier, now in many ways forgotten in favor of auto-centric patterns of strip centers and fast food. This is the story of hundreds of towns throughout the country. Where I grew up is no different. Welcome to Chickasha and the story of what we were doing about our small town. The story of my hometown starts in 1892 when the Rock Island Railroad decided to cut straight through Indian and Oklahoma territory. That started a rush of people coming to these rural communities. In 1912, you can tell behind me, the Rock Island Depot was built as a lasting structure that further cemented that this would become a lasting town. And this is a story of so many other small towns. There weren't big investments all at once. It was small, incremental steps. A street grid was formed, a main street was formed, and those wooden buildings were slowly replaced by more permanent brick structures. Infrastructure was put in. Muddy streets were replaced with gravel streets and eventually with brick streets, creating the infrastructure we see today. Most of these patterns were in a grid of 25 by 100 foot deep. Every building was any number of different things over the years, from movie theaters, then to a department store, then to a general store, then maybe to even a doctor's office, and really created a sense of community. People were living close together and watching out for each other. As you can see, a lot of these buildings, which are just ripe for redevelopment, and the value per acre as far as sales tax revenue and other revenue generating sources for the city are the highest per acre right here in your city's heart. Throughout this process, we're going to introduce you to a lot of community stakeholders who we sat down with, interviewed, and discussed, what this means to them. Really, the story is in these buildings and these spaces and what they can become. And just like this building here, a friend of mine bought this building and turned it into a new retail center. About 7 years ago, my father, Kerry DeHart, and his partners at First National Bank had an opportunity to buy the Chickasha Hotel, which had fallen into great disrepair. They put together a program, utilized historic tax credits and low-income housing tax credits to restore that building behind me into its former glory. And that really kind of woke up downtown to the fact that big projects can be accomplished here, that somebody just has to step out and do them. And so that kind of led a group of community members through the Chickasha Economic Development Council and many others in partnership with the city to pursue the OU Institute of Quality Communities to come do a master plan for downtown, help engage the community, figure out, what do we need here? And I think that's a great starting point to our story, and we'll let Ron France with the OU Institute of Quality Communities introduce their approach and what they did here.
My name is Ron Franz. I'm the director of Small Town Studios at the OU Institute for Quality Communities, and this is housed at the Christopher C. Gibbs College of Architecture in Norman, Oklahoma. So I've been lucky to be able to work on this Chickasha project here with a group of people. And how did this project happen? Each year, the Oklahoma Municipal League releases a request for proposals to municipalities throughout the state of Oklahoma requesting ideas and projects that they'd like to get design assistance through the Institute for Quality Communities. They provide a small matching grant, just an incentive grant. They try to help reach these communities all over Oklahoma. In the spring of 2018, Chickasha did submit one of the proposals. It was through the Chickasha Economic Development Council, and we were just really intrigued. And so we came to look at downtown, and we were blown away with the size of the downtown as well as the quality of architecture and the quality of spaces in downtown. And we knew that we had a perfect fit. So in the spring of 2019, we had our faculty and graduate students with the IQC involved, and then we had a total of, I believe, about 32 students in the Environmental Design Practicum course and the Environmental Design Capstone course come do 2 different projects for this. And so as we did this, we kept meeting property owners and business owners who were so excited about what to do. And so we formulated what we were doing with our semester-long classes. One class did a parking survey and a parking study and sort of an accessibility study on how you could walk around downtown Chickasha safely, and where parking was being used and where it wasn't. In the capstone course, I had students break into 6 groups. They looked at a bike route from the college up to downtown. They provided 6 different recommendations for the projects, and we've just been really so happy to be able to work with the people in Chickasha. There's certain towns in Oklahoma that have a real urban feel. They're very large buildings, they're very large scale buildings, multiple story buildings, like over 3 stories. This is one of those urban towns. Every time I come here, I see more activity, more businesses, more enthusiasm for downtown. I see that, and I keep hoping. I want to come back and see more buildings filled with more activity. I think some incredible spaces are still waiting to be found here.
Let me introduce you to Pat Cunningham, the historian and volunteer director of the Grady County Museum. Here we'll learn more about the history of downtown Chickasha and some of its architecture.
I'm Pat Cunningham. I'm the volunteer director-curator of the Grady County Museum, owned and operated basically by the Grady County Historical Society. Chickasha began because of the Rock Island Railroad. But if the Rock Island had not decided to build the railroad from Chicago down to Houston, going south, across Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory, Chickasha would not be here. They brought all those buildings in, and that was the beginning of the north and south side of 100 block Chickasha Avenue. And then we began to go further west. You're standing in the museum, which is housed in the old Dixie department store. The original construction was 3 lots wide. About 4 years ago, we received a check for $100,000. We had to use it to buy the building next door, which put it back in with these. And what we plan to do is add additional display space and then finish the 2nd floor, which will give us storage, basically a conference room, classroom, meeting room, along with a hallway with displays. That front facade out there on the 1st floor, it's not the original facade, but if you go upstairs in the attic space behind the front, there's a wall. They could go in and take brick, and when they turned one over, it says Tiffany in Chicago on it, and that was only available until 1907, the year of construction of the building. You're blessed that you're standing in an outstanding regional museum, according to the Oklahoma History Center. We keep winning grants to help us take care of business, and we have one of the first from the Oklahoma History Center. We need to get the word out so that everyone is comfortable accepting the old. There's nothing wrong with it. Yes, it costs a little more money, but to protect downtown, I think it's important. Otherwise, it just kind of dies off, and we're going to raise a couple of generations without a neat heritage. And I think it's kind of important that we instill that in why we're here, because I think we're kind of losing that in a way.
As Chickasha began to grow, many businesses increasingly planted their roots in the downtown area. One such business is the First National Bank and Trust Company. We sat down with Lori Elzo, Executive Vice President of the bank, to talk about the bank's roots in Chickasha and the recent remodels.
All retail is important to a community, but we think that downtown is especially important. That our downtowns, our main streets, are the hearts and the souls of our communities. This building that we're sitting in right now was built in 1933. The architect of our building was Solomon Andrew Layton, who also designed the Oklahoma State Capitol. and the Skirvin Hotel in downtown Oklahoma City. And you can see the ceiling behind me. That's the original ceiling that he designed for us. First National Bank has been in downtown Chickasha since before there was a downtown Chickasha. We were here in 1892 when this area was first opened. This building was built in 1933. It's really kind of this corner building is really kind of fabulous at the time. It had Italian marble and a men's locker room that included a sauna. We decided that our soul was here in downtown Chickasha, and that this is where we were going to commit for the next 100 years of our company's existence. So about 7 years ago, we expanded another 25 feet down the block. The building that we expanded into had been the old Gilkey hardware store. It had not been maintained to a way that we could renovate it, so we ended up demolishing that building and rebuilding it in a style that was consistent with other downtown buildings. And then once that project was completed and we'd moved our staff into that building, we started on a renovation of this main lobby, which included exposing the ceiling behind me that we're really proud of, restoring the original marble floors, just really trying to honor this building that's beautiful and has been here for almost 100 years in downtown Chickasha. There's still opportunity here in our area, and we feel like that if other businesses like First National Bank commits to the downtown and is willing to invest in our downtown, that helps everybody, that it makes it attractive for shoppers and for people that want to come down for entertainment. That makes it attractive for young families who want to settle here in Chickasha. That adds to retail, that helps develop our schools. Those are the kind of things that we're seeing and appreciating here in downtown Chickasha.
As Lori said, it's extremely important to have a vibrant downtown in order to attract young folks looking for a place to settle down. No one knows more about young folks than President of the college in Chickasha, the University of Arts and Science, Dr. John Fever. We sat down with Dr. Fever and picked his brain on the importance of a healthy downtown and the revitalization of historical architecture.
I have been with the college since 1980. I came here as a member of the faculty and moved into administration in the late 1980s and been in administration ever since. The interconnectivity between the college and Chickasha is more distant than you will find in some communities, but in recent years I think the relationship has really begun to improve. We had this historical architecture that was just unparalleled, as you'll find on many campuses in the state. One of the early things we did was to get it listed on the National Register, and so there are 15 buildings and some other components that are listed on the National Register. And we've been able to bring most of those back online with a couple of exceptions, and I'd like to get those moving as well. While we have continuing development plans on the USAO campus for further residential units, we also have a cap on that in terms of the number we'd like to see there. And we're about 70% built in that regard. And with any kind of enrollment growth, we're going to have to go off campus in terms of student housing. And I think the downtown area would be perfect in that regard. Let's just say that you had an historic downtown that had its existing commercial activity, and you added to that retail commercial activity in the form of recreational and entertainment kinds of businesses. And you had about 150 or so students plus others living downtown as a residential component. It would have just an absolutely mind-bending effect on economic development for the community. The college sees its future bound up with economic development of that sort, and that it's willing to use its resources, its connection to outside investors and outside folks who are interested in this kind of community.
Let's head over to City Hall and talk to City Manager John Noblet. In this interview, we'll talk a little bit about incentives and also the city's perspective on sales tax and the necessity that is for a thriving city to operate and provide services to its citizens.
One of the biggest challenges, of course, in Oklahoma that's really specific to Oklahoma is the way that revenues are generated from municipalities. Because we are a sales and use tax only state, we rely on that dollar alone to provide all our services. In a lot of communities, that is why you'll see an economic development corporation that takes a separate tax. In our case, over the past several years, we've seen that the economic development dollar was taken off the tax rolls, and now we survive on the hotel motel tax for a lot of the investment we do. All of that couples together to make it very, very difficult to invest. So when you do invest in your community, we're looking for opportunities to get the most value for that dollar and extend it as far as we can. For a community, a downtown has the huge benefit of having most of the infrastructure in place. Even if it's aged in some cases, it's usually easier to utilize that infrastructure because you don't have to go back in and add much to a project to add infrastructure that you would need for new developments. So people have tended to try to navigate away from the old. In most towns, you'll have concentrations of old and new areas that develop. To fill those in again, I think you have to capitalize on people's nostalgia to a degree, to bring them back into that downtown, to revitalize and redevelop those buildings in those areas that may not be used to maximum effect for your long-term growth. As people come back in, it's a lot like going back home. If you ever lived in a town and you moved away, and you have a nostalgia for going home, and you'll see this, a lot of young professionals moving back into the communities they grew up after they said they never would. If you could do the same thing with like a historic downtown area, as those people come through and make their investments there, you begin to build back out. It gives you a second opportunity to fill in those gaps between the old and the new. For us, we realized that the investment had to be made by the city, as well as gathering a group of private partners together to make that happen. Public-private partnerships in a community our size, where you're relying solely on that sales and use tax, they're essential. If you do not find and cultivate those relationships, you won't ever be able to get to where you're going. You may have a plan, but you'll never succeed because the city alone can't do it. For us, that meant we took some of our economic development sales tax that we had in the bank for several years, and we broke off a little over $1 million to dedicate to a grant program downtown. You have to love an old building to take on the restoration of an old building, or regardless of the degree of restoration you're doing. We have to match make those structures with the right people. And the reason the city incentive is very important in that is because we know that it is more a labor of love to a large degree than a great investment on the front end. I think downtown, when you succeed, looks like community. I think it becomes a place for people to gather. You see mom and pop shops open at various hours of the day. You see pedestrians not just at 8 o'clock in the morning, but at 8 o'clock at night. Our people gathering, our people really living life together. And I think when we see that in your downtown area, that's when we go, I think we've succeeded.
Let's head over a couple blocks and we'll talk to another business owner who bought a building that was scheduled to be torn down. Mark McPherson, along with Jennifer Bailey with the Historic Preservation Office, and how they use different funding mechanisms to be able to afford the restoration of such an important building right on 4th Street in Chickasha.
So the tax credit program itself offers 20% of qualified costs associated with the rehabilitation of a historic building in the form of an income tax credit. And the building has to be eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. And downtown Chickasha is really fortunate in that it already has a listed historic district on the National Register of Historic Places. And so Mr. McPherson really approached me, I think it was through a phone call, and then he came to the office and we sat down and we looked at photographs and he discussed the project. And if you go through and complete the entire federal tax credit process, then the owner automatically qualifies for another 20% income tax credit at the state level. So it's up to 40% of your qualified costs in an income tax credit on 2 different levels.
The local Chickasha Economic Development Council It was also awarding money if we rehabilitate a building that is in the downtown historical district that Jennifer mentioned. So we had to go through an application process, and they were able to pay us up to $20 a square foot. This building was in such bad shape, I mean, we had to completely gut it. The only way we could do it is by getting that money from the EDC and also getting the state and federal tax credit. It just wasn't financially feasible. This is just the first completed space. It's about 1,745 square feet. We have another 2 to 3 other spaces that are not quite completed yet. This is just another segment of trying to reinvigorate the downtown community by redoing some old dilapidated buildings. Start early, be patient, and working with a contractor that's experienced in keeping the historical significance of a building and doing historical tax credits.
The application process, it's 3 parts, and each piece is 30-day review on our end and then a 30-day review at the Park Service. But the project owner has up to 60 months to complete his project. We always say factor in 60 to 90 days for every time you submit an application.
In discussions around town with community stakeholders, the conversation of quality of life always comes up. So let's head down to the brewery, a development that I never believed might happen. But here we are in the brewery with current brewery owners and founders, Nigel and Holly Dunham.
Y'all had gone into Chick's Liquor, made friends with Amy. Wes had actually gone in, talked to Amy, and that's how the connection was made. Y'all were working from home, brewing there, and this space was presented. And I know when we presented it, it was overwhelming, to say the least, because it was actually a storage building that we used. And working together was a great collaboration. I mean, y'all's input, our input, it all blended together, and it is what it is now, and everyone talks about it and everyone loves it. We try to keep the charm of the building, preserve what we could, clear cut as much as possible, and then use as many items as we could from the building back into the building. Yes. So I think that was pretty awesome.
It was some sort of service station from what we gathered from the photos. So you could actually literally drive into the building and then drive out the building through the alley. One of the key pieces that we faced, was getting the city on board with potential funding sources, getting CMS Willowbrook on board, ourselves, and just kind of having the vision and collaboration at the very beginning. Almost 100% of this project was funded with the Chamber of Commerce of Chickasha and the Economic Development Council. So, just another piece of advice for any potential taproom owner that wants to move to some downtown locale, whether it be in Oklahoma or any other place, is reach out to your city chamber, economic development councils, and see if there's any funding available for businesses.
I feel like Chickasha is a little piece of everything that we want. If you want to live right outside of Chickasha and live in the country, you can have that life. Being close enough to Chickasha to come into town and do whatever you need to do, have your small town, your small community, but being 45 minutes away from the city for bigger things that you want to do, I really feel like it's just perfect.
Even though Chickasha is growing larger, it's still that small town community. I mean, you can walk into any store and everyone knows who you are. Everyone's pretty much willing to help you. Everyone says hi. I mean, it's just a small town community.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our journey off the beaten path to Chickasha, Oklahoma. I hope that it's been somewhat inspiring. And the main message I want to get out is that it can be done, and the investment is really not that much. Let's honor our past by looking back at the development patterns that were laid out for so many centuries before us and recognizing why these incremental steps are the way to go. Let's utilize the infrastructure we already have. Let's make a walkable community. And more importantly, especially in today's age, let's make a community where people get out and talk to each other. Thank you, AIA of Oklahoma, for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. Look forward to the great projects that hopefully come out of this idea.